Hi, welcome to the latest episode of History You Didn't Know But Should. I'm Ray.
And I'm Chris.
And today we're going back to 323 BC. And we're going to be talking about the death of Alexander the Great. And you know what? When you think of Alexander the Great, what always sort of surprises me about him is when he died in 323, he was 32 years old and had basically conquered in about 13 years the known world of his day. I mean, it's just absolutely amazing. I'm 48 and I think, well, I haven't done anything near that. It makes you feel sort of bad.
Yeah. And if you think, pretty much everybody who has gone through some type of schooling knows about Alexander. It's just common knowledge. For the fact that you just mentioned, people look at and say, well, look, if Alexander the Great did this, you can do anything. And, it's kind of like this push to get you to understand, how good you can be. And that's all great. But, the real reason that Alexander the Great becomes great is because of his dad. And we've talked about that in a previous episode, talking about Philip II. That Alexander basically had everything laid out for him. All he had to do was to take it and to go with it. And he does that. And I mean, let's not fault the man. The man was a great leader. He did some amazing things, and he took the individuals that he had and he created an enormous empire. And the problem is, Ray, is that he conquers this large empire, but he has this urge for world supremacy that is just never enough, that he just wants to keep on going. You mentioned 32 years of age, and he's like, there's just one other area that I need to cover, one other area I want to go after. And the problem is he was never content. And because he was never content, he'd never be able to, I guess, what would you say, enjoy the spoils of what he created and what he was able to have. And so he has this desire that he wants to keep going. And he wants to go into India and to other places. And his soldiers are tired. They're war slammed down. I mean, they've been fighting. They've been away from home. They're just ready to call it a day. And Alexander's pushing them. But finally, Ray, you can be a leader, but if you don't have soldiers to go with you, you got to stop. And Alexander, after conquering many kingdoms, decides it's time to go home. And Ray, as you mentioned, it's at that moment that on the way home, he becomes sick. And ultimately, he'll never see home again.
Yeah, the story of Alexander the Great, as you're talking about the fact that he had conquered so much, but he really wasn't satisfied at the end of the day. There's so many lessons in that, I think, for modern people, for young people, for middle-aged people, and even for older people today, as we see so many people. And I think the two of us are in some ways in a similar situation where you're pushing to that next goal. You're pushing to that next degree, that next promotion, that next howdy do from the president or the chancellor or whoever it may be, that sometimes you don't stop and sit back and enjoy what you have already achieved. And, when I look at Alexander the Great, and I think about what you just said, that I think is one of the first things that sort of pops out to me, is that this is a man very young, even by today, almost, I wouldn't say, a youth in today's world. He'd still be approaching middle-aged, but he, still very young man, has done so much, but he was still so ready to do more. He just simply wanted more.
He wanted more, but I think, and this is that moment where people say, when you're at death's door or when you're on your deathbed, that you start to review life and you start thinking about things. And I think that, when Alexander, who had just recently had said, I want to go, and his guys were like, no, he says, okay, well, I'm ready to go home, maybe, see my family, but at that moment, he realizes that everything that he's been fighting for, everything that he's accomplished, that he's getting ready to leave this world. And that is, to me, I think the death of Alexander the Great is probably one of the most fascinating parts of Alexander's life, in my opinion, having taught, Alexander the Great, his life, his legacy, lessons learned. It's what happens on that deathbed that speaks all the way up into 2022 as a reminder to what you said. Think about what you have, embrace what you have, and live for the moment and not live for the accolades. And that's where Alexander is, as he is recognizing, I'm not going home. This is it. And, Ray, people talk, well, was it malaria? Was he poisoned? What was going on with him? And that's all great for, discussions and historians to review and to have all of these really, cool stories and conspiracy theories. But Ray, to me, I think what really is the juxt of our conversation today is what happened in Alexander's last few breaths.
Yeah, he is very sick, been very sick for a few days. And then we come to his dying hours, I guess you could say. And he, according to the people who were there, he gives his generals 3 requests. And those 3 requests, I'll sort of outline them here and then we can break them down further. First, he wants his physicians to carry his body alone. Number 2, he wants the path leading to his grave to be strewn with gold, silver, and precious stones while his body's being carried down. And then he wants his hands to be kept out of his coffin with holding nothing. So he has these very strange final requests that have come down to us, like you said, even to 2022. And Chris, off the air, we sort of discussed this about the historicity of these 3 wishes. And it's one of those things where, based on my research, and you know more about Alexander the Great than I do, but based on my research, I think the general gist of these 3 wishes is probably historically accurate.
Absolutely. And we get this from the passed down from the generals who were there. And these generals go on to have significant lives themselves and are major players in history. When you start looking at Cleopatra and Julius Caesar and all of these, you start to see some of these players who take Alexander's kingdom. It gets broken among the different ones. So these generals, they left behind stories and memoirs and legacies. And as these generals left them behind, they all tell this story. And they probably don't tell it in the way that we're telling it as a story, but that's what it is, this life lessons from Alexander. I mean, it's, Deep Thoughts by Alexander the Great. But what it is an opportunity for us to take those wishes and to apply them into our own lives. And, you mentioned that he goes to his generals and says, listen, I'm departing from this world. I know. But he makes them swear to him on oath of allegiance, I'm still the general. I'm still Alexander, and you're my subordinates. And so I'm asking you to swear to me that you're going to carry out these wishes. I don't ask a lot, but what I do ask is that these 3 things that you just mentioned, that they are done and they are done properly. So, Ray, we talk about that first one, right? That first one is he says, my physicians alone must carry my coffin. And, you think about that. The generals had to be saying, wait a second, why do you want doctors carrying your coffin? I mean, don't you want us, your generals? Don't you want your best friends? I mean, don't you want something like that, kind of carrying your coffin? But he was very serious that it had to be physicians. So Ray, what do you think the point of that is?
When I read that, Chris, first thing that came to my mind was he wants them to carry their burden. A physician, and this is just me looking at my notes, what I caught of it, but a physician can only do so much.
Yeah.
He had been, I guess, in the final days or hours of his life here, he had been treated by physicians, probably some of the best they had at the time, and none of it had done any good. So it was sort of like, okay, the physicians tried to save me, so they couldn't. And it's this idea, in my mind anyway, that they're bearing their burden, that their failure maybe to be able to heal him, therefore they have to carry him to his grave. And Chris, that's true even today. I remember years ago listening to a doctor who was talking about losing patients and not being able to save everyone who comes in the door. And the doctor said something to the effect of, there comes a time when you have to take your hand off their shoulder. It's over. There's nothing more you can do. And I think that's really what Alexander is hinting at here, that there's only so much that doctors and physicians can do, and they can do a great deal more today than they could in Alexander's day. And give it 10, 15, 20 more years, they'll be able to do even more amazing things than they can do today. I mean, you think about what we could do today: heart transplants, lung transplant, kidney transplants. I mean, all the amazing things doctors can do, and it's just going to only get better as time goes on, I think. But there's still a point which they can't do anymore.
I go to the fact that when we're sick and we go to the doctor, we expect them to immediately prescribe something to us that will fix us, heal us, make us whole, take away whatever pain it is that we're going to. And the reality of what I think Alex is saying, and I'm sorry, Alexander, but Alex for short, but what I think that
Alex.
That's right. But what I really think that he's coming to is, listen, they're people just like everybody else, that no doctor can really cure anybody. Because the body is something that over time continues to deteriorate. You can go get Botox. You can go and have reconstructive plastic. You can have all these surgeries, and you can try to lift this and lift that and puff this and, push out that. You can do all of these things. But Ray, at the end of the day, your heart gets weaker. Your body gets weaker. And I think Alex is basically just reminding us that doctors are powerless and that death is going to come. I mean, who was it? Was it Mark Twain or Ben Franklin? I can't remember who said there's only two things in life you're guaranteed, and that's death and taxes. Mm-hmm. That the death's going to come. And, he is basically telling his generals, and ultimately us today, don't take life for granted. There's going to come a day when you're going to be on your deathbed. There's going to come a day when this life ends. So every single day, give it everything you've got. You go hard for that day, trying to do good in the community, trying to, to better this society, to leave it better than you found it. And so every single day, we have to look at it as if it could be our last, and therefore go out and give it your all. And so I think if we put our 2022 version in it, that's kind of what Alex was telling his generals. That I want them carrying the coffin, because I want everybody to know I'm Alexander the Great. I am a general who has conquered the known world, and death still got me.
Yeah. When I remember a few months ago when Queen Elizabeth II died, and it just reminded me once again that death is the great equalizer, that it doesn't matter. You can be a queen or king, president, prime minister, or you can be a pauper on the street. It doesn't really make any difference.
Yeah, I thought she was going to live forever. And she served, for forever. Everybody in our generation above us and before us, it's always been Queen Elizabeth. Mm-hmm. And I think, we're not even in England. So imagine them when she died, it was just this moment when everybody was like, I never thought that would happen. I never thought that the queen would not be my queen. Mm-hmm. So I think you start to see that. And then, Ray, we come to the second request, which is kind of strange. and basically, he says, okay, I've told you that one. And then here's my second one. And that is, as these physicians are carrying my coffin to the grave, I need you to make sure that the path in front of me is got gold and silver and all of the precious stones that, I've collected and we've got in the vault back there that we take with us everywhere we go. I need you to lay those out in my path as I'm making my way to the grave. And Ray, there's a lot to be said about that. And I think our listeners, before we even expound upon it, probably know where that's going. If we don't talk about stones and jewels and gold, but we put it in the context of money today.
Yeah. When you die, your checking account's still going to be there. You ain't taking it wherever you go. It's not doing you any good at that point. And I think that is a wonderful picture by Alexander that he wanted painted upon his death, that, having your life centered around wealth and money and power, these are things that at the end of the day, they're not going to last forever. They're all going to be, they're all, you're going to leave them all behind. I think one thing I've thought about over the years and talked to other people about, one of the things is, we collect all this stuff. You have a nice house, you have a nice car, you have, if you're me, you've got a statue of George Washington in your office, and, all this stuff that, means so much to you, that you prize and all this. And at the end of the day, your children, your grandchildren, your nieces, your nephews, whatever, they're going to have it at a yard sale with a nickel price tag on it, and it's like that really puts these things into perspective, that all this stuff that we think is important is so temporarily important. It's not important in the long run, because when you're cremated or your body's put into the ground, all that stuff's not doing you any good. And I think that's what Alexander realized here. This is a guy who, in his short life of 32 years and about 13 years in power, he had, amassed a lot of wealth, a lot of riches. He had conquered lands and conquered territories. He had drank heavily. He had indulged in all sorts of behaviors. And here he is at the end, and he realizes that none of that really did him any good in the long run.
I mean, he wasn't even taking one gold coin with him. There's nothing that's going with him. And he makes the statement that it's a sheer waste of time to chase wealth. And, some people would question that, because they say, well, you've got to have money to be able to survive. Well, that's not what he's saying here. He's talking about an inordinate amount of wealth. He's talking about going out there and trying to get all the money you can possibly get. And he just said, don't chase wealth, chase passion. What is it that you're passionate about? I know when I've taught classes and we're talking about the importance of finding, a job, that I always tell them, you're not trying to find a job. Right. You want to find something that you're passionate about. And to the point where, I've told individuals, if I ever show up at my doing what I love to do, and I call it a job, or if I do something that shows that my heart's not in it, I need to walk away from it, because that's not what it's about. It's not about the money. It's about being passionate about something that I wake up every day and I look forward to getting to do what I want to do. It's not that I wake up and I got to go to my job. I wake up and I'm looking forward to being able to go do what I do, that it means something, hopefully to somebody else. But to me, I feel that I'm making a difference. So I'm not chasing wealth. I'm chasing what I'm passionate about. And I think, Ray, there's something to be said about getting an education, about going to school, about getting all of this stuff, because there's so many people in our world today who have missed out. They're doing a job instead of living life. And it's really sad because this is all that they can do, because maybe they missed some opportunities, or maybe they chased wealth, or maybe they did whatever instead of just chasing after, what it is that really matters to them.
Yeah, you think about people who make a lot of money, but who absolutely hate their job, who absolutely hate what they're doing. They don't want to do it. And I think there's a big difference between someone like that and someone who, maybe they're not making as much money as that person, but they're happy with what they're doing. They're content with what they're doing. And of course, all this brings us to the third and final wish of Alexander the Great. And that is, he wanted both of his hands kept out of the coffin, so people would know that we came into the world empty-handed and we go out of the world empty-handed. It's the hearse doesn't drag a U-Haul picture, if you want to put it in the modern world. you know, when you go to that funeral home, whatever you're going to have done to your corpse, when you go to that funeral home, you're not taking anything with you. And, you know, that nice car, we talked a few minutes ago about other items that you may value as important, not going with you. That credit card will belong to somebody else.
And I do think it's interesting, you know, he prefaces by talking about the beginning and the end. You know, he basically says, I came empty handed into the world. You know, Ray, we come in, I mean, just naked, and we know nothing. We cry, but we don't even really know what we're crying for. We do all of these things. And then, you know, as we make our way through this world, we begin to learn. We have these needs, we have these, you know, thoughts and all of these things. But then at the end of the day, when we leave this world, we leave it the same way we came in, empty-handed, as you said. And, you know, there's a point there that reminds us that everything that we are doing needs to be done with the point of how you leave this world better after you've left it. And I think too often we're focused on making it better for ourselves instead of leaving the world in a better place. You mentioned all of these artifacts in our homes, all of these things that we have. You know, that there are some things that I'm very passionate about that I have, but I'm passionate about them, but I try to teach my children and my family, this is why I'm passionate about that degree that's hanging on my wall. You know, I want you, when I'm no longer in this world, I want you to see that degree on my wall and know he did that so he could leave this world a better place. You know, my dad did that so that, you know, I could be able to understand the importance of an education, or that I understand the importance of hard work, not to make money, but to make a difference in the world. So there are things that we work for. And I don't remember who it was or what it was, but they always talked about, you know, at the cemetery, they've got the born date and they've got the end date. And what's really important is the dash in between those two dates, because the dash in between the born date and the end date is what did you do with what you were given in this world. And Alexander the Great did a lot. And he did leave this world better off. He had issues, he had a lot of problems, but don't we all? But he made a difference. And that's why today, in 2022, we're still talking about this guy, because he made a difference. And honestly, the difference is, it wasn't that he conquered the largest empire that was known at that time. That's not what it was. But it's what he did with that empire, and it's how he did it, and what he left behind.
Yeah. It's what you do. It's what you leave behind, not what you take with you, because you're not taking anything with you. And Chris, I don't think I've got anything I can add to what you just said about his last wish. I don't think there's anything else to add there.
No, I just think that it's a reminder to us that history you didn't know but should. That history isn't always about dates and people and places, but it's about legacy. Every individual we study about in history, every building we've talked about, every event, there's a lesson to be learned from that. And I think Alexander the Great's lasting legacy is always this: don't take life for granted. Don't go chasing wealth, but live life every day to the very best. Give it your all, and recognize that you have been brought into this world for a purpose. And that purpose is make a difference. So on this week of Thanksgiving, I think it's a great opportunity for us to take Alexander's words and to go out and make a difference for somebody, and be thankful for what we have been given and use it for the betterment of society.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And of course, Alexander the Great dies there in 323 after several days of illness. And one more interesting sort of tabloid I'll sort of tack on at the end here is what happens after he dies, Chris. He goes, according to the sources, about 5 or 6 days where his body allegedly didn't corrupt. It wasn't showing signs of decomposition. And it's very interesting when I was reading through, and I must admit, I got a little sidetracked in some of my research for this one. because it's like, well, what would cause a person, not to decompose over that period of time? And of course, there's all sorts of theories and ideas about it. But, even in death, he leaves lessons, his three lessons, but also whatever it was that went on, whether he wasn't really dead yet and he just went into a deep coma and actually died a few days later. This is a man who, his story is fascinating at every single turn. His story is absolutely fascinating. So anyway, going to land the plane there, Chris. Hope everybody enjoyed this episode. Please share this podcast with your family and friends. We're available now on Anchor FM. We're also available on Amazon Music, Spotify, iHeart, Google Podcasts, Stitcher. We're available wherever you get your podcasts. We have a Facebook page, a Twitter page. For now, we're going to see what happens to Twitter here in the coming weeks and months. But we are still on Twitter for now. So again, please share this content with your family and friends. Until next time, I'm Ray.
I'm Chris.
We'll talk to you later.